They said the $5 million Henderson Industries deal would make or break our quarter, but what they didn't tell me was that closing it would break my career instead. When my manager David Chen stole credit for 18 months of my work and paraded it as his own victory, he thought he'd buried me forever. He was wrong. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The conference room smelled like burnt coffee and desperation that Tuesday morning in November. Rebecca Martinez, our VP of Sales, had called an emergency all-hands meeting with no agenda, just a cryptic Outlook invite titled, Major Announcement, Mandatory Attendance. I slipped into the back row, laptop balanced on my knees, watching my colleagues file in with the same confused expressions I probably wore. Our company, Pinnacle Solutions, specialized in enterprise software implementation for manufacturing giants. We weren't the biggest player in the market, but we had a reputation for turning around struggling operations. The Henderson Industries account had been my white whale for over a year and a half. A massive steel manufacturing conglomerate based in Pittsburgh, they were hemorrhaging efficiency across 12 facilities and needed a complete digital overhaul. Rebecca dimmed the lights and pulled up the quarterly results presentation. Her voice carried that particular brand of corporate excitement that meant either very good news or very bad news disguised as opportunity. Team, I'm thrilled to announce that we've officially closed the Henderson Industries contract. $5.2 million, our largest single deal in company history. The room erupted in polite applause. I felt my heart skip, a mixture of pride and anticipation coursing through my veins. 18 months of late-night strategy sessions, countless trips to Pittsburgh, relationship building with their C-suite, technical demonstrations that I'd rehearsed until my presentations were flawless. Every PowerPoint slide, every cost-benefit analysis, every risk mitigation strategy had my fingerprints on it. Then Rebecca continued, and the words hit me like ice water. This incredible achievement wouldn't have been possible without the tireless leadership of our Senior Account Director, David Chen. David, would you like to share how you orchestrated this remarkable victory? I watched in stunned silence as David stood up from the front row, straightening his tie with practiced confidence. The same David who had joined our team 8 months ago, 3 months after I'd already secured the initial Henderson meetings. The same David who had spent most of our client calls asking me to recap the technical specifications because he couldn't keep our software capabilities straight. He walked to the front of the room like he owned it, that easy smile spreading across his face, as if this moment had always belonged to him. Thank you, Rebecca. You know, when I first took on the Henderson challenge, I knew we were looking at something special. The key was understanding their pain points at a granular level and crafting a solution that spoke directly to their operational needs. My throat felt like it was closing. Those were my words. Not similar words, not inspired by my work, but literally phrases I had used in our team presentations. He was reciting my strategy memo almost verbatim, the one I'd shared with him during his first week to bring him up to speed on the account. David clicked to the next slide, a detailed breakdown of Henderson's facility optimization plan. Every chart, every projection, every implementation timeline was pulled directly from documents I'd created. I recognized my formatting style, my color schemes, even the specific font combinations I preferred. But nowhere on any slide did my name appear. The real breakthrough came when I identified their bottleneck in the Cincinnati facility, David continued, gesturing at a flowchart that I'd drawn on a whiteboard during a brainstorming session 3 months earlier. By repositioning our approach to focus on their most critical pain point first, we could demonstrate immediate ROI and build trust for the larger rollout. I sat frozen, watching him steal not just credit but the very language of my expertise. He talked about my relationship with Henderson's CEO, Margaret Walsh, a woman I'd spent 6 months cultivating trust with over dinners, golf outings, and late-night phone calls when their systems crashed. He described, quote, my innovation in bundling our software with implementation services, a strategy I'd proposed after analyzing their failed attempts with our competitors. The presentation continued for 20 excruciating minutes. David fielded questions with the kind of confident vagueness that comes from memorizing someone else's work without truly understanding it. When Rebecca asked about specific technical implementations, he deflected smoothly to, quote, the talented technical team who supported the vision, never mentioning that I had designed every aspect of their new system architecture. As the meeting wrapped up, colleagues began filtering out, stopping to congratulate David with handshakes and backpats. A few people glanced in my direction with expressions I couldn't quite read. Sympathy? Confusion? Or maybe they knew exactly what had happened and were waiting to see how I'd respond. Sarah Williams, one of our junior account managers, approached me as I was packing up my laptop. Jessica, that Henderson work was incredible. You must be so proud of how it all came together. Her tone was careful, probing. She'd been in enough client meetings with me to know whose work David had just presented. I managed a tight smile. It's certainly been a learning experience. After the meeting, I retreated to my office and closed the door. The walls were covered with Henderson Industries materials, printed emails, facility maps, organizational charts, with handwritten notes about key decision-makers' preferences and pain points. 18 months of my professional life reduced to David's 15-minute victory lap. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. My computer screen showed 17 unread emails, including one from Margaret Walsh herself. Jessica, David mentioned you were instrumental in pulling together the technical aspects of our agreement. Thank you for your behind-the-scenes work. Behind-the-scenes work. As if I'd been some invisible assistant, rather than the architect of the entire relationship. I opened my CRM system and pulled up the Henderson account history. Every interaction, every phone call, every meeting was logged under my name, with timestamps going back to March of the previous year. David's first entry was dated July, and even then, most of his notes referenced follow-up on Jessica's recommendations or continued discussion from Jessica's technical demo. The evidence was there, documented in our own systems, but it felt surreal to need evidence for work I'd lived and breathed for over a year. I scrolled through hundreds of entries, each one a small piece of the larger puzzle I'd assembled. Initial market research, competitor analysis, custom pricing models, implementation schedules, risk assessments, stakeholder mapping, budget justifications, technical specifications, training protocols, success metrics, and contingency plans. Then I opened my email archives and searched for Henderson communications. The thread with Margaret Walsh alone contained 247 messages, starting with my cold outreach and building through months of relationship development. David appeared in the chain exactly twice, both times as a CC when I'd included him on status updates. I found the original proposal document, a 63-page comprehensive strategy that had taken me 3 weeks to complete. The metadata showed my authorship clearly, along with revision history showing my edits and refinements. David had never touched the file. He'd never even opened it until the week before our final presentation, based on the access logs. But none of this mattered if no one was willing to acknowledge it. I pulled up our company's org chart and realized the brutal simplicity of what had happened. David reported directly to Rebecca, while I reported to Marcus Thompson, our Director of Client Success. When David joined the team, Rebecca had positioned him as the strategic lead on major accounts, while I remained categorized as implementation support. The titles had seemed like semantic differences at the time, but now I understood their significance. In the corporate hierarchy, David's role was inherently viewed as more valuable, more senior, more worthy of recognition. My technical expertise and client relationships were seen as supporting functions to his strategic leadership, even though his strategy was entirely based on my groundwork. I spent the rest of that afternoon in a strange state of suspended animation. I answered emails mechanically, attended a routine project meeting, updated client files, all while my mind processed the magnitude of what had been stolen from me. It wasn't just credit for a sale, it was recognition for expertise I'd spent years developing, relationships I'd carefully cultivated, and innovation that could define the trajectory of my career. By evening, I'd made a decision. I wasn't going to storm into Rebecca's office demanding justice, and I wasn't going to send angry emails to HR about unfair treatment. David had won this round through positioning and politics, but he'd also revealed something important about how the game was really played at Pinnacle Solutions. I opened a new document and began typing, not a complaint or a protest, but a methodical analysis of what had actually happened. If David wanted to claim ownership of my work, he'd have to live up to the responsibility that came with it, and I was going to make sure he had every opportunity to prove he understood what he'd stolen. The Henderson deal was just the beginning. I had 6 other major accounts in various stages of development, each one representing months of relationship building and strategic planning. David didn't know it yet, but he'd just inherited not just the credit for my past success, but the expectation that he could replicate it. I was going to let him try. That night, I drove home through Seattle's evening traffic with a strange sense of clarity. The rain was steady against my windshield, and the city lights blurred into streams of color. My phone buzzed with congratulatory texts from friends who'd heard about the Henderson deal, messages that praised my hard work and dedication. I responded with simple thank you messages, not correcting their assumption that I had been properly credited. At home, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat at my kitchen table with my laptop. I began building a comprehensive archive of my work, not just on Henderson, but on every account I'd managed over the past 3 years. Client communications, strategic documents, technical specifications, relationship maps, revenue projections, implementation timelines, and success metrics. I wasn't collecting evidence for a confrontation. I was building a foundation for independence. David had shown me that no matter how indispensable I made myself to the company, I would always be vulnerable to having my contributions minimized or erased. The solution wasn't to fight harder for recognition within a system that had already demonstrated its priorities. The solution was to build something that couldn't be taken away. As I organized files and screenshots, I found myself thinking about Margaret Walsh's parting comment during our final Henderson meeting. "Jessica, you understand our business better than some of our own executives. If you ever decide to strike out on your own, we'd be interested in continuing to work with you directly." At the time, I'd dismissed it as polite conversation. Now it felt like prophecy. The next morning came with the kind of Pacific Northwest drizzle that matched my mood perfectly. I arrived at the office an hour early, not because I was eager to start the day, but because I needed time to think without the distraction of colleagues celebrating David's supposed triumph. The building was nearly empty, just the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant sound of the cleaning crew finishing their rounds. I made coffee in the break room and settled at my desk with a legal pad, something about writing by hand that helped me think more clearly. At the top of the page, I wrote David Chen, Henderson Account Analysis, and began listing everything he would need to know to maintain the relationship he'd just claimed credit for building. Margaret Walsh preferred communication via phone rather than email for anything sensitive. She had a daughter starting college in the fall and often mentioned concerns about tuition costs, making her particularly sensitive to budget overruns. Their Cincinnati facility manager, Roberto Santos, was skeptical of new technology and required extensive documentation before approving any changes. The Pittsburgh location had a union contract that restricted system modifications during certain shifts. Henderson's CFO, Patricia Kumar, demanded weekly progress reports with specific metrics that I'd developed over months of trial and error. These weren't details David could Google or find in our CRM system. They were relationship nuances that came from hundreds of hours of conversation, observation, and adaptation. I filled 3 pages with information that would be critical for maintaining Henderson's satisfaction and securing the additional phases of work that were already in preliminary discussions. Then I opened a new email and addressed it to David with Rebecca copied. The subject line read, Henderson Industries, Transition Documentation. I kept the tone professional and supportive, exactly what would be expected from a team player helping to ensure client success. David, congratulations again on the Henderson closure. As we transition account management responsibilities, I wanted to provide comprehensive documentation of client preferences, ongoing projects, and upcoming milestones to ensure seamless continuation of service. Please find attached detailed client profiles, technical specifications, and implementation schedules. I'm happy to schedule a thorough briefing session to review any questions you might have about maintaining these relationships. I attached 47 documents, everything from Margaret Walsh's preferred meeting formats to technical diagrams of their current system architecture. If David wanted to own my work, he was going to own all of it, including the responsibility for understanding complex details that couldn't be faked in presentations. His response came within an hour, Surprisingly curt for someone who should have been grateful for such comprehensive support. Thanks, Jessica. I think I have everything under control, but I'll reach out if I need clarification on anything. Rebecca's reply was even shorter. Great teamwork, everyone. Let's keep this momentum going. I printed David's email and filed it carefully. His dismissal of my offer to brief him thoroughly was the first mistake, though he didn't know it yet. In 3 days, Henderson was expecting their weekly progress report, something I'd been delivering religiously for 8 months. In 2 weeks, Margaret Walsh was expecting a technical review meeting to discuss Phase 2 implementation. In 6 weeks, their board meeting would require updated ROI projections based on first quarter performance data. David didn't know about any of these expectations because they weren't in our standard CRM system. They were relationship commitments I'd made during the sales process, promises that had helped close the deal. Now they were his promises to keep. I spent the morning updating my personal files and began reaching out to contacts in my network, not to complain about David's credit theft, but to explore opportunities. Jennifer Morrison, a former colleague who'd moved to a boutique consulting firm, had mentioned they were looking for someone with enterprise software experience. Michael Rodriguez, who ran business development for a Henderson competitor, had suggested coffee several times to discuss industry trends. These weren't conversations about job hunting, not yet. They were relationship maintenance, the kind of long-term network building that had made me successful at Pinnacle. But now those relationships felt like insurance, rather than professional courtesy. The first crack in David's facade appeared on Thursday. I was in the break room when I overheard him on a phone call with someone from Henderson's IT department. His voice carried that particular strain of someone trying to sound confident, while completely lost. Right, so the integration timeline. Let me verify that with our technical team and get back to you, he was saying. Through the glass partition, I could see him frantically typing notes while nodding at a phone conversation the other person couldn't see. Yes, absolutely, we're completely aligned on the infrastructure requirements. I'll have a detailed response to you by tomorrow. When he hung up, I watched him immediately open his laptop and begin searching through files, his expression growing increasingly frustrated. The integration timeline they were asking about was part of a complex technical specification I'd developed, specifically for their legacy system constraints. It wasn't documented in any standard format because it required understanding both their current setup and our software's capabilities in ways that took months to fully grasp. I finished making my coffee and returned to my desk without offering help. David had made it clear he had everything under control. Friday brought the first missed deadline. Henderson's weekly progress report, which I'd delivered every Tuesday for 8 months, didn't arrive. By Friday afternoon, Margaret Walsh's assistant had called our main line asking for an update. The call was transferred to David, who assured them the report would be delivered Monday morning. I happened to be walking past his office when he hung up the phone and immediately called Roberto Santos at the Cincinnati facility. From his side of the conversation, it was clear he was trying to gather basic status information that should have been routine. Roberto, hey, it's David Chen from Pinnacle. Yes, we spoke during the implementation kickoff. Right. I'm following up on the system integration progress for this week's report. What do you mean, which specific modules? All of them, obviously. There was a long pause, and I could see David's face growing red even from the hallway. Could you send me the current status breakdown? I want to make sure our report matches your internal tracking. No, I don't have last week's numbers in front of me right now. The conversation continued for several more uncomfortable minutes before David hung up and immediately began typing what looked like a frustrated email. I continued to my office and opened the Henderson file on my computer. Every weekly report I'd ever sent was saved with detailed backup data, client feedback, and forward-looking projections. Roberto Santos had been one of my most reliable contacts, someone who appreciated detailed technical discussions and thorough documentation. He would be expecting specific metrics formatted in particular ways, with commentary that demonstrated deep understanding of their operational challenges. David was about to learn that maintaining these relationships required more than charm and presentation skills. Monday morning brought David's first attempt at the weekly Henderson report. I received a copy since I was still listed as a technical resource on the account. The document was 3 pages of generic progress updates that could have applied to any client, filled with corporate buzzwords and completely lacking the detailed operational insights that Henderson's executives had come to expect. Within 2 hours, Margaret Walsh had forwarded the report to Rebecca with a note I saw when Rebecca accidentally replied all to a follow-up email. This is quite different from the detailed analysis we've been receiving. Is Jessica no longer involved in our account management? Her reports were extremely valuable for our internal planning. Rebecca's response was swift and uncomfortable. David is now the primary point of contact for strategic oversight, though Jessica remains available for technical support as needed. I'll ask David to provide more detailed reporting going forward. I watched this email exchange with fascination rather than satisfaction. David was discovering that stealing credit for a sale was easier than managing the ongoing relationship that made the sale possible. But he wasn't ready to admit he needed help. Not yet. The real test came the following week, when Henderson requested an emergency meeting to discuss system performance issues at their Baltimore facility. Margaret Walsh's email was direct. We're experiencing unexpected bottlenecks in the new workflow processes. Can someone from your team who understands our specific configuration review this immediately? We need solutions, not theory. David scheduled the meeting for Thursday afternoon and sent me a brief message. Need you to handle the technical discussion for Henderson Baltimore issue. I'll manage the strategic conversation. There was no acknowledgement that this strategic conversation would be impossible without understanding the technical problems, and no recognition that the technical solutions required relationship context he didn't possess. I agreed to attend the meeting, but made a decision that would change everything. Instead of preparing my usual comprehensive briefing materials, I would limit my participation to exactly what David requested: technical discussion only. No relationship management, no strategic context, no proactive problem solving that went beyond the immediate question. The meeting was a disaster. Margaret Walsh and her team presented a complex workflow problem that involved multiple facility locations, integration between different software modules, and coordination with their existing supply chain management system. David attempted to lead the strategic discussion, but quickly became lost in the technical details that were fundamental to understanding the business impact. When they asked about timeline for resolution, David looked to me expectantly. I provided a straightforward technical answer. The software modification would require approximately 2 weeks for development and testing, assuming no conflicts with existing integrations. Margaret Walsh frowned. What about the impact on our Q1 production schedules? Jessica, you usually provide us with workflow alternatives while we're waiting for technical fixes. I glanced at David, who was clearly expecting me to take over the conversation. Instead, I maintained my limited role. That would be a strategic decision about resource allocation and operational priorities. The silence that followed was deafening. David scrambled to fill it with generic reassurances about minimal business impact and seamless integration. But it was obvious he didn't understand the interconnected nature of Henderson's operations well enough to provide meaningful guidance. The meeting ended with Margaret Walsh requesting a follow-up call with whoever can provide comprehensive solutions, not just technical specifications. David assured her he would personally handle the strategic coordination, but I could see in his expression that he was beginning to understand the scope of knowledge required to maintain these relationships. That afternoon, I received a private email from Margaret Walsh. Jessica, I hope I'm not overstepping, but I wanted to understand the change in our account management structure. Your insights have been invaluable for our planning, and I'm concerned about continuity of service. Are you still available for direct consultation on strategic matters? I forwarded the email to David and Rebecca with a note. Received this client inquiry about account management structure. Please advise on appropriate response protocol. I wasn't trying to undermine David publicly, but I wasn't going to hide client concerns that could affect our service quality. Rebecca's response came within minutes, requesting a meeting with both David and me for the following morning. The subject line read, Henderson Account Coordination, but her tone suggested this was more intervention than coordination. That evening, I received 3 more emails that would reshape everything. The first was from Jennifer Morrison at the boutique consulting firm. Jessica, we've been following some of the industry buzz about the Henderson deal. Impressive work. Are you interested in exploring opportunities where your client relationship skills would be the primary focus, rather than support function? The second was from Michael Rodriguez. heard through the grapevine that you were the real architect behind the Henderson success. We're opening a new division focused on digital transformation for manufacturing clients. Your expertise would be exactly what we need to launch effectively." The third email was the most surprising, from Margaret Walsh herself, sent to my personal email address. "Jessica, I got your personal contact from your LinkedIn profile. I hope this isn't inappropriate, but I wanted to discuss something outside of official channels. Would you be available for a confidential conversation about potential consulting opportunities? Henderson is planning significant expansion, and we're interested in working with experts who truly understand our industry." I sat in my kitchen that night, rain pattering against the windows, and realized that David's theft had accomplished something he never intended. By claiming credit for my work, he'd elevated my profile in ways that staying in the background never could have achieved. Industry contacts who might never have noticed my contributions were now asking questions about the real story behind Pinnacle's success. More importantly, I was beginning to see that my value wasn't tied to Pinnacle Solutions or David's recognition. The relationships I'd built, the expertise I'd developed, and the results I'd achieved belonged to me, regardless of who took credit for them. David could steal recognition, but he couldn't steal competence. I opened my laptop and began drafting 3 careful responses. To Jennifer, I expressed interest in learning more about their client relationship model. To Michael, I suggested a conversation about industry trends and potential collaboration. To Margaret Walsh, I proposed a confidential coffee meeting to discuss her expansion plans. None of these responses committed me to leaving Pinnacle, but all of them opened doors that David's credit theft had inadvertently created. For the first time since the Henderson announcement, I felt something other than anger or frustration. I felt anticipation. The next morning's meeting with Rebecca would be David's opportunity to demonstrate his mastery of the account he'd claimed. I was genuinely curious to see how he would handle the growing gap between his public success and his private competence. But regardless of how that meeting went, I was no longer dependent on David's failure for my own success. I was building something bigger than revenge. I was building independence. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.